Sure, Mike.
Good morning. Good morning. Guys, I brought my iPad, but it's not connecting, so I'm using this computer. Hopefully, it's going to work today.
Amen.
All right. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, you're learning Yerushalmi, Peah, Pedig Beis, Halachet Dalid. We're going to be learning Daf Chav Beis, and we left off on Daf Chav Aleph, Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the beginning of the Gemara, Hazareya Sadeo V'chule. So the final case of the Mishnah spoke about one who was planting 2 varieties of one species, 2 subspecies. So a person, let's say, is planting wheat, but you have in wheat kufa, you have white wheat and brown wheat. That will be the example the Gemara will be given. So now, do you have, when you plant wheat and barley, you have to leave payah from wheat for wheat, barley for barley. Here, it's all the same wheat, but it's white wheat, brown wheat. So here, the Mishnah said, it depends on the kavanah, on the intent you had during harvest. If when you were harvesting it, which means when you were cutting it, you had in mind to make one goiden. The word goiden literally means threshing floor. We don't only mean threshing floor because they would thresh, trample on it, then they would winnow it, and then once they got rid of all of the klipa, they would pile it and they would smooth the pile. All of that means goiden. If the kavanah was to make one goiden, one payah, if the intent during the harvest was to make it two geroinos, then you have to have payah from the white for the white and for the brown or brown. In other words, we learned in the Mishnah that kavanah is king. So that's what we had in the Mishnah. Gemara is going to begin discussing gavaldic cases where a person changed one's kavanah in middle of the harvest. And the Gemara is going to give all the different types of cases. And there's going to be a simple solution. It's not going to get complicated. The cases will be complicated. The solution will be, it depends what the final intent was, as we will see. Now, really, we're going to learn like this. We already learned these dinim, just to chazer it, and now to start using the words of Chazal. Choivas hakotzir bekama, which means the choiva, the obligation of payah, if you didn't fully harvest the field, which you should not, you have to leave payah. If you didn't fully harvest it, the choiva is bakama, to leave standing grain. The ani, actually, as we'll speak at Rab Chaim, the ideal obligation of payah is not a mitzvah of nesina, it's a mitzvah of hanacha. You leave it, you don't harvest. But if you fully harvested the grain, now you have no kama. So now you also have to give payah. From what do you give it? From that which was already harvested. That's called chazra payah la'omarim. When you began to harvest, the obligation was to leave the end. That's why the kavanah is the end. We'll see the latter kavanah. It's only after you fully harvested it, then the obligation went back to all of the already oimarim, which are the bundles, which is normally the way people, when they would cut it, they would first bundle them when they're still connected to the ground. It's just easier. Then they would cut it, they would harvest it. Now they have oimarim, as we have in the chaloim of Yosef, and they would take the oimarim to the goyden, and then they would, like we said, they would thresh it, they would winnow it, and they would pile it, and they would smooth out the pile. Based on this rule of choivas hakatzir bakama, just to give you an example, what happens if a person who's harvesting his field, we're going to have this later, but I just want to give an example. You're harvesting the field, and halfway through came a fire and burnt the other half. That person won't have any obligation to leave any payah. Why? Because when you were harvesting the first half, you were going to leave it from the end. Now the end burnt. Notice, when do we say that if you didn't leave payah, the obligation goes back to the oimarim? That's if you did something wrong. You harvested the whole field without leaving payah. You shouldn't have done that. So it's called chazra payah lo oimarim. If I was doing my mitzvah of hanacha, a fire burnt it, then the obligation, so to say, evaporates. That's it. There's no obligation, and that's
does the same thing apply if it was stolen?
And the Mishnah says befedish to the stolen. Very good, Keva. We're going to see how that's going to be so related. I know it's going to become it's small dafim to all the different scenarios where there was a change of kavana in the middle. Now that's going to be daf chaf beis amud aleph. The whole chaf beis amud beis, and God willing, also continuing to tomorrow will be agadata. The Mishnah speaking out this case. The Mishnah speaking out this case said that when this happened, they asked Rabbi Gamliel. In other words, you had one wheat, one species, but there's brown and white. This din that you follow the kavana, they asked Rabbi Gamliel, and he went to Nacham HaLavlor, and he had a Kabbalah. He went to the Sanhedrin. He asked all the guys, and Nacham HaLavlor quoted that Rabbi Yasha heard something from my Nacham's father. This din that we learned, and he heard it from the Zugais, heard it from the Nevi'im, heard it from Moshe Rabbeinu, the importance of Mesoida. And on this importance of Mesoida is going to be used in the interpretation of a pasuk in Hosea. In Hosea, it says the following: Echtov loy rubei toirasi. Literally, pshat. God says, "I wrote for the Yidden the roiv of my Torah." Roiv means the Torah Shebal Peh that was not written. And by the way, that implies that the roiv of the Torah Shebal Chsav will get there, which doesn't make sense. K'moizar nechshavu. Nevertheless, the pshat, God says, I'm still like strangers to them. Pshat, when I give them rebuke, even though I gave almost all my Torah to them written, they're not listening to me. We're going to have 4 different pshatim in this pasuk in Hosea. It's going to be very much connected to a sugya that we had in Gittin. If someone can bring me a Masechtas Gittin, I want to push it to read it. In Gittin, Daf Samach Amud Beis, say mamash on top of the Amud, we have a very agadata machloikis between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Guys, Rabbi Lazar, the Amoyra Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas, we learned this in the Bavli Masechta in the Yerushalmi Brachas. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar. Remember that whole story? Anyway, there's a machlokes between them, whether the roiv of the Torah is Torah Shebachsav, whether the roiv of the Torah is Torah Shebal Peh. We're going to read a Rashi there. Hopefully we'll have time for all of this. Yeah, sure. And we're going to have a machlokes. We're going to have statements in our Gemara that's very much related to that. We're going to have the concept of Chavivin, Divrei Soif, Shem Yosem, Divrei Torah. We're going to share a lot of Hasidus regarding all these, the bris, the covenant that God made. Did God make the covenant for Torah Shebachsav? Did Hashem make the covenant for Torah Shebal Peh? And ultimately, the main message will be is that the Mesoida that we have, which is Torah Shebal Peh, this is the Iker Torah, and the covenant that God made with the Jewish people, which makes the Jewish people special. The Gemara says that the V'neflino aniva amcha is dafka Torah Shebal Peh, and the Gemara uses beautiful words that which was written is no longer unique to the Yidden, because all the nations went taka and they copied our Torah. Then the Gemara doesn't say what I'm saying. They tweaked it. They put on other names, and they made. So when you look externally, we have books. The Gemara, they have books. We have parchments. They have parchments. Why did God make a Torah Shebal Peh? The Gemara is not it. This makes the Yidden unique. Who has the Torah? Only the Yidden, because of Torah Shebal Peh, which is why Rabbi Gamliel, he consulted by his chavedim if they have a Mesoida. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that, as we'll see when we learn the Gemara inside. And let's hit it right away. Let's go. Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis, second to last line. The Gemara begins quoting the unique case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah began by saying, Min echad, I don't care what your kavana is. White wheat, you can make 10 goyronos, 1 payah. 2 minim, I don't care if you decide to make 1 goyron. If it's 2 minim, 2 payahs. If it's 1 wheat with 2 subspecies, 2 varieties, then it depends on your kavana. And like we mentioned, not what you do. It depends on what you were intending when you were doing the when you were doing the harvesting. Says the Gemara, now just Belosha in Yerushalmi, the word igdu, I know that a oigid, agadam, igdu here means white wheat. And shamusis means brown wheat. And when we're going to start reading, let's make it a Rashi day, when we're going to start reading the Noisa Kalim, they have, instead of having it igdu with a dollar, just to know the Rashi is Goyrish, this word with a reish, aguris. So it doesn't matter whether it's igdu or aguris. Also, it's shamusis, shamchasis. It's white and brown. So here we go. Katzar, so the same, you have a field. It's all wheat. But you have two types of wheat, white and brown. You began to harvest. Where are you up to? You harvested chatzi igdu. You already harvested chatzi shamusis. And while you were doing the half and half, right, we have that cookie, right? The black and white. Sama mavis mamish. You have to make a goimel if you live after eating that cookie. So lasoisun goyden achas. If you had kavana to make one goyden, and what will be the din now? We said in the Mishnah, since you had kavana to make one goyden, you leave one payer for all. You leave one payer for all. But now, v'nimla, in the middle of harvesting, you changed your mind. You reconsidered. Va'ason shtei goronois. And now you began, then it's about the time of the harvest, you began to harvest the rest with the kavana that you're going to make them. Why would you mix them together? You're gonna make them into two threshing floors. And what happens now? There's a gavaldik kekash. No, you change your kavana in the middle. So there's one rule. It's going to go throughout. Says the Gemara, turning to today's daf chav beis amud aleph. Einoi mafrish min ho igdu al hashamusis. Again, we're going to nuance. Began one. You ended with two. Since we're going to see the final kavana is what counts. In other words, you have to leave peya white for white, brown for brown. Guys, don't forget peya. You leave from the standing grain. That means not only are you going to be leaving white for white, brown for brown for the second half, shita, even for the first half, even though when you began with the kavana to, you're harvesting it. You're going to make it into one goyden. Doesn't matter what you did. That was your kavana. Since you changed your mind in the middle, and now you have in mind to separate the white and the brown, even if it's too late for the first half, I don't care. Since the end of the ketzira was done with the kavana of making them into two piles, white has to have peya left from the standing white for the white and standing brown for all of the brown. Loi batchila, loi basoy. That's the gavaldik word over here. Look inside the Rashi Ilio. 4 lines on the right column, 4 lines from the top of the Amud. And take a my tama. Why would that be? Why don't we at least say, yeah, Danny, say that, listen, the first half you had in mind to do goyden echad, the first half you already harvest with that kavanah. At least for that, allow to leave one for the other. No, my tama, because the choivas peya b'mechubar, that's the key words over here. It's called choivas hakatzir bakama ubasar ketzira delo soifas linen. When do you leave peya? Now, guys, I know you're going to say we learned in the previous chapter that you can leave peya batchila. Remember the 3 machlekes tanaim. All of that is not lachatchila. That's when we learned the Mishnah. We said that even latana kama. Lechatchila peya means harvest, but don't harvest all of it. Leave the edge. So when are you fulfilling the obligation? By the end, you're leaving it. So that's why your last kavana is that which is effective. Again, obas, like I said, the losoifas, 90% in before you left the peya, 90% in. Ucheshnei minim daininu, we judge it like 2 different minim, and therefore umafresh minho aguris, his aguris metareish shall soif, not only for the soif. That's what the Rashi will say. You have to leave now a 60th, not only from when you changed your mind, from the end of the white. You have to leave a 60th for all of the white, even for the white, even shea ala aguris shabatchila. Even though then you were having a mind to do it on one goyden. Now here's his nusach. Hasham hashich shall soif al hashich shabatchila. Again, brown for all of the brown. Keep your finger in that Asher Elio. We're in 7 lines on the bottom. Back in the Gemara. I just mentioned that, but since if you did not do it that way, the lachatchila dik way according to all of the Tanoim, not only according to the latter 2 Tanoim Remember Rabbi Yehuda the most. If you don't leave it basoif, what you left is nothing. Peya means harvest, 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 leave. Then I don't know. I don't know the case over there. I do not know what to do if he left it in the beginning. That will be different. Here, the word is since you didn't leave it yet. Okay, now back, guys. Keep your finger on that. I said earlier. It's beautiful, simple until you'll see. You're gonna say, "Wow." Next case, the opposite. And v'chatzi hashamusis. In the beginning, you began with the kavana while you were harvesting it, some shnei goyronos, and therefore the din would have been that you would be chayiv to leave pay white on white or brown for brown. And here also the nimlach, you reconsider the middle. Middle doesn't mean middle. Middle can mean after two, one cut in. Middle means before you left payam, and now va'ason, you have kavana to leave it into goyden achas. Gavaldik. So now, same thing, follow the final kavana. One payah suffices for all. Mafrish min ho'ikdoi shebasoif al hashamusis shebasoif. And by the way, obviously vice versa. The chiddush will be that not only, since in middle you have in mind to leave it one goyden, for the latter part you take one for both. Not only that, but more. That's the chiddush. It goes all the way back. Read inside the same thing. Look inside the Rashirilio. Min ha'agudish shebasoif ala shamusis shebasoif, and the kolchchein min ha'agudish shel soif ala shamsusis va'agudish shel tchila. Inami min ha'agudish shel soif ala shamusis va'agudish shel tchila. The basar ketzira shel soif ozlinon. The komet starfi. So why are we adding another case? El du komash malon. The tchilas ksira mashakotzar. Chiddush here will be. Here's the chiddush. Even though you began with having kavana to do what shnei geronos, after the having yadat shnei geronos, which means when you began, there was a chiyuv that was chal on the white for the white, on the brown for the brown. Began that way. The loy tema hochayli I'll call min mitzvah delay. Now that each min has its own obligation on it, you would think once the obligation went into effect, how do you remove it? V'sulei paka. That's the chiddush. That kamash malon. Even in the second case, you began with two geironos. You changed your mind for one. That latter kavana undoes the first kavana. Kamash malon the ksira de lasoif. Yes, mafkalei. Beautiful. Now, okay, let's leave it like that. Now, back in the Gemara. Now, the next case in the Gemara, don't get nervous. This will be an application of the rule that we spoke on in the introduction. And then so let's read these words inside. And that will be it's not a connection. It's going to be an introduction to the real Chiddush case of changing Kavana in middle. But before we get to the Chiddush case, the Gemara says like this. Mafrish min ho'igdoi al ho'igdoi. When is it that you don't do the mitzvah of leaving Peah? And that's a big deal of Rab Chaim in the words of the Rambam, that when the Rambam speaks about the mitzvah of Peah, the words of the Rambam is that the mitzvah is lohaniach. Rambam writes, yaniach hakoma ma'at la'aniyim. Yaniach, mitzvah of hanocha. When the Rambam later writes that if amad v'katzar, that's his case, you harvested the whole field, you made a mistake, you're not out of the obligation of pay. And now the Rambam writes that you separate from the harvested, the Rambam writes the words, and you give it to aniyim. So the Reb Chaim is madaik, what's payah? Is payah a mitzvah of leaving? Is payah a mitzvah of giving? Tell you a big nafkamina. What happens if I leave payah and no aniyim picked it up? I did the mitzvah. I left it. Fact, and there have to be aniyim. The fact that no one picked it up, I did my mitzvah.
Are you allowed to take it back?
I don't know. Could be it's hefker. Could be
it's hefker, right? Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe since it has to be left for aniyim, if it's still edible, maybe ani will come. I don't. But the mitzvah was done by leaving it. This and Masha Enkein, when there's a mitzvah of giving, this is a concept we have a lot on Hasidus. Who makes the giver a giver? Who makes the giver a giver? The receiver. If you don't have a receiver, I'm a fundraiser. You need me. When I am receiving your check, I am giving you more than you're giving me. In other words, that's how it works. So if before the ani received it, you didn't do the mitzvah of giving it. So let's read it inside. Mafresh min ha'igdoi alo igdoi. Only kishakila sodeyu. Not about kavanah. It's when do you give from that which was already harvested? When can you give it from your threshing floor? From the threshing floor. If you already harvested it all. Aval im loikila esodeyu, which is ideal, if you didn't fully harvest your field. In other words, then the mitzvah is not to give it. The mitzvah now is to leave it. Afilu min ha'igdoi al ha'igdoi eina mafresh. Don't forget, if I did not fully harvest my field, I don't even have as an option b'di'eved to do my payout by giving from the harvesting. You have to leave, like we said, that choivas hakotzir is dafke bakoma. Choivas hakotzir is not on the kotzir, it's on the koma. Only if you harvested it. Why are we saying this? Now for the third case. Not a related case. We're saying this because the Gemara gave two examples where you change your kavanah. Now we established this intro. Now we're going to firais with the chiddush, which is that kotzar chatzi igdoi. If you harvested half of the white, hold your heads, guys, and you harvested v'chol hashamusis, all of the brown. Now think, if I harvested all of the brown, Danny, when I harvested all of the brown, if I would have had in mind to make a goyden separate, and I harvested all of the brown, now, like we mentioned, now that there's no brown left standing, I have to give from the oimarim of the brown. What happened here was I harvested all of the brown. I only harvested half of the white. When I harvested the 1.5, I had still in mind to make it into one goyden, and therefore you can give from one on all, and therefore the standing white is available for the fulfillment of the hanacha for the brown. In other words, you can't say on the brown, give from the imarim on the brown. That was the introduction, because when is there a chiyuv on the imarim? Only when you harvested it all. Here you still at half of the white. And now the chiddush is now v'nimlach bason shtei gononis. Before you finish the white, you said, you know what? I'm gonna separate the white from the brown. What happens when you change your mind? What did we say? So we said until now that the ikir is only the final kavanah. Now you had in mind to make two goyronos. Now what happens? What happened? You have the problem here. The question is, what do you do with the brown? You might say, now that you have in mind shtei goyronos, so now for sure the remaining white cannot be used for payah for the brown. That's for sure. Question is, do you now have to separate from the oimarim of the brown for the brown, which is what happens when you make a full harvest? Now the obligation goes to the harvested wheat, or you're not chayv at all. That's the introduction. We said that's what we said when we gave the intro. That's the big chiddush, that if I'm harvesting half of my field, forget about brown and white. I'm doing everything. I have in mind to leave at the payah. And when it comes before I harvest at the end, a fire burnt it, or a Kavan said, a ganav stole it. I'm not obligated at all. That's the chiddush here. Now, white for white, of course. Mafresh min ha'igdoi al ha'igdoi. Now, mafresh min ha'igdoi al ha'igdoi, you know what that means? It means that from the remaining white, I have to separate not only from the half of the white, I have to separate a 60th for all of the white. The chiddush will be is v'chol hashamusis shesham niftera. Wowie, yechap gavaldik.
Right. This is because they're considered as one when you change your kavanah.
This is beautiful, because like this, when you are harvesting, even though you harvested all of the brown, again, when do we say chazra pe'ela imarim when you harvested all of it? When you harvested all of the brown, since at that time you had in mind to make one goyden, you had still the kama. You had kama. Now, poof, there is no kama of the white for the brown because you can't use it anymore. Let's read inside the Marav folder. Let's learn one Marav folder. You kind of gain the system. There you go. Look inside the Maraful. It's under. It's 6 lines, 7 lines under the Gemara. Chatzachatzi igdoi. B'chol hasham musis. Almanas lasses goyden achas. You began that way, and therefore v'havalei hakol min echad. And v'kiven sheheniach chatzi igdoi b'kaimaser. Since you left half of the white in standing, so chiyuv hasham musis. The chiyuv of all of the brown is b'chatzi ha'achlani, which is good. In other words, you still have the comma. Now v'chichazar v'chatzar lachatzi ha'igdoi ha'achlin almanas lasois and shnei goyra nois. Niftera hasham musis ligamrei. You took away the obligation from the brown. And it worked. While you harvested all of the brown, since because you had then in mind to do one goyden. We don't do that. We only do that when there's nothing left. Here you had left. And even though you harvested all of the brown, was b'chatzi kama so igdoi. Now, now when you're harvesting the final half, the last 20%, the last shtickle of white, you changed your mind, and we already established that the final kavana is king only. Almanas l'seshes negeronois havalei kevan ki'ilu nisraf choyvasoi. And in that case, the petura legamri. Just like for the white itself, and we don't say when is there a rule that if I harvested all of it, now you have to give it from the bundles? That's only big. Only bikila. Kila means I destroyed it. I harvested the whole thing. I did something wrong. God tells me leave payah. I didn't leave payah. Here I left the payah. I left from where to leave the payah. I wasn't going to leave all of it payah. Something else happened. Something else happened. By burning, it's something out of my control. Here, that's what Danny meant to say. It's gaming. Here, it's in my control. Here, I changed my kavana. Doesn't matter. Then I would have to take. If I had in mind, very good. It's all the ikar. If I harvested everything with the kavana to make goyd and achas, no matter what I did later, even if I was mavada later, then you take from anywhere a 60th for everything. Beautiful. Okay, Chevra Atkan, the Nigla, and now Abyssal Chasidis before davening.
One last question.
Yes.
When is the last time you can change your kavana?
As long as you still have some comma. As long as you have enough kana, I would say to fulfill. I don't know. See, that's the question. What happens if I don't have a 60th, but there's enough to fulfill your biblical obligation? Okay, good. All of these. Okay, says the Gemara. The point of the Gemara is, like we mentioned in the introduction, the Mishnah establishes 2 simple rules. 1 min, mamish. 1 min means 1 min, white wheat. I don't care what your kavana is. I don't care how many goydens you're making. 1 pay. 2 minim, wheat and barley, I don't care if you put them into 1 goyden, 2 payers. If it's 1 wheat, but it has 2 varieties in wheat, up to your kavan. That's the Mishnah said these words. Then when they asked that case to Rabbi Gamliel, he consulted. Now, there are many ways of learning the Gemara over here. Let's go. Let's read. Maisa, Shazara, Rab Shimon, right? It was Lifnei Rabbi Gamliel. We said Lifnei Rabbi Gamliel doesn't mean he planted it in front of Rabbi Gamliel, but he put the question and he went and he asked. He didn't use his seichel. The question is that there is a Mishnah. I know the Mishnah was not written then, but we're going to get to that in a moment. There's different nuances of learning these Gemaras. They're very important. Okay? So says the Gemara, Amar Rab Se'eda b'Shem Rabbi Yechanan, based on Rabbi Gamliel's reaching out to his colleagues to hear a explicit, orally transmitted halacha, which comes back Moshe Sinai, that im bas halacha tachas yodech. If a halacha comes to you, ve'ein at yodeya mativa. Now there's so many different ways of translating these words. I'm going to just share 2. One is that you don't know the reason for this halacha, or in the Yerushalmi, you're not certain as to what the halacha is. It's very different. Al kafli geno davar acher. Don't compare what you don't know to what you do know by saying they appear to be the same. There, I know the rule over there, I'm going to apply over here. You can't do that. You know why? Because if Hashem said regarding the case in front of you, a specific din doesn't have to fit with that. Not everything do we know the reason for it. To be Madama Milsa La Milsa, you have to know the real underlying reason. So if this is going to be this is a way, there's other ways of learning. If you don't have a halacha, you don't have a Masoida, you have to be Madama Milsa La Milsa. But before you use your own reasoning, first find out if there's an explicit Masoida, and then you follow the Masoida. Yeah, it makes sense, not make sense. Now, the last words are difficult in the way I learned Pshat. But Vikulhen Mishukois b'Mishnah, they are all incorporated in the Mishnah. What do we mean by that? So look inside the Rash. Let's go with the Rash Shadilio. In basalacha ezu din liyadach v'nistapekes, and you have a doubt. Why do you have a doubt? Because you don't have a clear misoida regarding this halacha. Sha'al v'al taden me'atzmecha and v'tedame milsa lemilsa. Don't make your own comparison, even though what you're doing in your mind makes sense. She'efsher she'oise inyan atzma yesh be'kabala b'yadei zechachem. And as we find the Chumach Mazel from Nachum HaLavlor, so the Rash, I was quoting the way the Rash earlier learns. Now, look inside the Pnei Moshe. Pnei Moshe learns different. There's many ways of learning this. Look inside the top Pnei Moshe. You don't know the reason. You know the halacha. You don't have a doubt. You know the reason. You just don't know my tam shalois halacha. It's a whole different thing. You know the halacha. Not like that. You don't know the reason. That's the word. That's that the Pnei Moshe understands the words for kulam mishukois. That if in the Mishnah there is a halacha, what happens is like this. Sometimes you read a halacha, it makes no sense to you, and so therefore, what do? It can't mean what it says literally. You try to be maflig. The Mishnah is speaking about another case. I'm not going to read the Mishnah properly. And I'll tell you why I think the Pnei Moshe is saying it. And first of all, aside of the words, Kubi Darash Shadilio didn't even have the words V'kulin Mishukais B'Mishnah. V'kulin Mishukais B'Mishnah means, guys, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, even if not explicit, implicit, he incorporated the whole Torah Shabbat in the Mishnah. So if you read something in the Mishnah, don't reinterpret it. Don't say, the Mishnah. Now, if the Chachamim did it, then we do it. A lot of the Gemara does it. The Mishnah is not the way you think it. We limit it because they had a Masoida. If you don't have a Masoida, don't use your seichel to change the pshat of the Mishnah. Leave it the way it is. Why is he saying it? Because in the Mishnah, before Rabbi Gamliel consulted, we already had the Mishnah says, I'm reading the Mishnah. Then the Mishnah has I'm reading inside the Mishnah back on that Chafal from the base. What do you think? Everyone who Mishnah is by heart. I think that, don't forget, we kept on emphasizing that the Pshat of the Mishnah wasn't a son goyden achas, you made one goyden. No, we says that you had kavana when you were cutting for the goyden. That's the meaning of these words. Rabbi Gamliel wanted to make sure that's the case. Because actually, if you would read the Mishnah Kepshutai, the Mishnah says, when you make it into one goyden, peya achas. When you make it into two goyden, two payas. If you take that literally, then Kavana B'chlal is not mentioned in the Mishnah. And maybe that's why he needed to consult to find out what's the meaning over here. And because there was a Masoida interpreting the Mishnah not Kepshutai, it's not about you making it asa on goyden achas. It's about what you had in mind during the cuts and what you will do. He applied that. I think that's the Pnei Moshe. Very different than the Rash Shadil. Okay, be that as it may. Amar Abavin v'yaus. Yeah. That this Rab Ze'eda b'shem Rabbi Yechanan is good. How do we know it from our Mishnah? Shnei minichitim. Ilulei sheba nachum u'peina shlanu. Yoidin hayinu. Would we have known? We wouldn't have known. That's the pshat. We would have interpreted the Mishnah not the way we have a Messiah. So let's go now with the Pnei Moino. Was even when you have words in the Mishnayos, find out if not what it makes sense to you, which many times will be following the words. Ason goyna nachas. Find the Messiah, whether it's the Rashidili, whether it's Pnei Moshe. One thing is clear, that the entire Torah Shebal Peh, even after Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote it, if you have someone that learned it from his teacher, find out from them how they learned Pshat. That's the correct way. Don't extrapolate from the written, the halacha, you don't know. If there is someone else, so ask. Okay. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to, like we mentioned, we have a pasuk in Hosea. The pasuk reads, you can look in the Torah, Oir HaShalom, Echtov loy rubi toirasi. The pshat is God is saying, I wrote for loy means for them, for the Jews, the majority of my Torah, and nevertheless it's a rebuke. God, they still treat me like a stranger. What's the pshat? They have a problem here. How can it even say that God is saying that I wrote for the Yidden, the majority of my Torah, v'chiruba shel Torah nichtaba? Torah Shebal Peh is a lot larger than Torah Shebachsav. Torah Shebachsav is the whole Tanakh. So what? Tanakh is 24 Sfarim. Torah Shebal Peh, you have the Mishnah, you have the Brisa, you have the Sefta, you have the Medrash, you have Agoda, and now we have the Gemara. So it says the Gemara, Elo, Drashim Menachsav, Min Advarim, and Drashim Bal Peh. This is extremely important. Zot, the Rashanilio, let's go with the Rashanilio, Merubim Henosh Menachsav, Roiv HaTorah, even what you call Torah Shebal Peh, which is correct, but it's Tuluya b'Medrash Aksuvim. It's learned from expounding a pasuk, Kigoin Klal Uprat, or there's a Yitur, or there's a Gzeira Shava, or any other of the Midrash HaTorah Nedreshes Mahem. In other words, yeah, I know that there are so many things that are not written in Torah Shebachsav, but everything that can be learned, that Chazal learned, and they found a hint to it in the Torah, all of this now, according to Rabbi Lazar, is called Torah Shebachsav. That's a lot more min advarim and adrashim bepeh. Dvarim she'ein lahem even a remez b'Torah ella completely b'alpeh nemru l'Moshe, for example, that the tzuos of the tefillin have to be black. They are miyutim. What is he trying to say with that? And v'hachi ka'amar kra kasafti lehem reiv Torah. I wrote reiv Torah means I at least hinted reiv Torah. You know what happened? There are strangers means we're being rebuked for that we forgot it. That's the pshat. Means if we wouldn't have forgotten it, we would have had at least the roiv of the Torah, the way we're saying over here. Mamish, the way it's a hemshah. Would you have a doubt on the halacha? Everything it's hinted to, but you have to have a Messiah. Where is it hinted? No, stop. I'm stopping over here. We have enough time. This is Gitan Daf Samach Amid Beis. The and this, who said this? Rabbi Lazar. It fits. Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas says the Gemara that Amar Rabbi Lazar Torah roiv b'chsav miyad bal peh. Mamash like this. Shenemar echtov loy rubi Torah sikma yizar nechshavul. However, Rabbi Yochanan, I'm reading the Bavli. Rabbi Yochanan Amar no roiv bal peh umiyad b'chsav. How great is this machlekes? No, the majority. Why? Or proof, because it says, and this happens to be a pasuk in Kisisa Shmois Lamed Daled at the end. Ki al pi hadvarim ha'ela. P means Torah Shebal Peh. So Rashi over there in Zajac, like, what do you mean roiv b'chsav? That's the Rashi that we read. Roiv b'chsav, like it's a mitzias. How can Rabbi Lazar say that? He says roiv ha'Torah tuluya b'medrash eksuva lemedrash lebachal prat gzeira shava v'shar mida it's one of the shvahem miud bal peh she'ein remes lilmoid lo b'Torah at all. Point is that everything roiv of the Torah that you think, where did the Chachamim get it from? They got it. God gave it to Moshe, and he showed him the remes. Everything God gave to Moshe. Roiv, he showed him a connection, and he's rebuking us for forgetting it. And by the way, that's the whole kavan of the Gemara, for sure. The way Chassidus sees it, that when God gave us the Torah, what do you think Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Yidden Machar or Yom Kippur? What was he teaching us? Torah Shebal Peh. We didn't even have the Chsav. Torah Shebal Peh. And then, as the Torah was written, the Chayav of Moshe, the Chamesha Chumsha Torah. Later, all of the other 19 Sfarim, Our job is to find a connection between the Torah, which is Torah Sheval Peh, and that which was written. Mamish, the opposite of the way people think. It's not that God gave us the written and then we went ahead and we were breaking our heads to understand it. No. Moshe Rabbeinu Torah Sheval Peh. Torah Sheval Peh we got later. And Gemara means one interpretation. We are finding the link between the Torah and the Torah Sheval Peh.
Okay. But why is God's complaint is that we forgot it? Don't we have it all written down now? What is it?
We don't have it written down. No. Even in our, let me go with the Pnei Moshe. Even though we had the words of the Mishnah by heart, the words were Hazaresh Teshneminim, Asor and Goyden Achaz. They all learned these words. Leisnan Pei Achaz, Negoronois, to Peyois. When an actual story happened, Rabbi Gamliel didn't apply the Mishnah to the case, and he was good that he didn't do it. Because he found out from Nacham Alavler that the meaning of these words is not you made a Goyden, it's Kavana. Or that's the way one way of learning the Gemara. You have to consult. You have to find out the meaning of everything. You cannot know the meaning from reading it. You look at the Goyim Lahavdol. They read the Torah Shebechsav and they have a different Torah. You don't know it. You cannot learn it from the written. The Torah is Torah Shebal Peh, and it was Merumas and Torah Shebechsav, and God wants us to remember that Emes, and that was forgotten. Now the Gemara says, "V'cheini Emes." How can you say that the Roiv of the Torah was Nichtava? This, my friends, who compiled the Yerushalmi? Rabbi Yochanan. That's why I wanted to read the Bavli. Rabbi Yochanan argues befedish with him. It's a crazy machal. Rabbi Yochanan says, Roiv of the Torah is Torah Shebechsav. Mamish. Rabbi Yochanan, right? Rabbi Lazar says, Torah Roiv Bechsav. So Rabbi Lazar, Torah Roiv Bechsav, Umiud Balpeh. And Rabbi Yochanan says, Roiv Balpeh. Roiv Balpeh. Elo, you know what's true, what's Kani, and that will be another way of expounding the pasuk in Hosea. That chavivin hein hadvarim hanadrashim min hapeh. Chavivin min hadvarim hanadrashim min achsav. Chavivin gewaldig. In other words, look inside the Marafulda, 8 lines from the top. Chavivin hadvarim shebapeh. Yom dvarim shebachsav. More min hadvarim min hatoyre shebachsav. V'had kam hadvarim hanadrashim. Right? Lav dafke. I want to say like this. When we speak about Chavivin Hein Advarim, so there is a Gavin and a Chefza here. That's a word in Chasidus. In other words, people think, it sounds like that the halachas, that we needed the Chachamim to have Yegiyah. And through their drasha, they came to certain halachas, we love it more. It's more beloved. Like you love that which you earn more than the Namad Sufa. Chasidus says no. That chavivin min hadvarim hadrashim min apeh is a chefza. It means that the source of that Torah that's only nilmad from the Yud Gimel Midos, the source is greater than the source of the written Torah, and we're going to go more in that soon. But it's getting late. Let's keep on going. Now there's another interpretation. Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi, it's really Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi. Echtav Rubei Torasi. That Rubei means roiv, right? He's darshaning. Rubei means from an arrow. Roiv akashas. A shooter, it goes specifically to the Techachas. Not that God says, I gave them the majority of the Torah and they don't listen to me. God says, I gave them rebuke. You know what rebuke is? Rebuke is love. You know, by the Gerech Hasidim, the Gerech Rebbes used to smack their Hasidim. There was nothing more beloved for a Hasid if he got a fras from his Rebbe. You have to understand, a Toichacha, it means that the teacher loves the student. If he wouldn't love the student, he would not rebuke him. God is saying, I gave them so much rebuke, and nevertheless, I feel okay. And the final interpretation, no, God is saying there's no complaint here. God is explaining why didn't He write everything down? Why is the roiv of the Torah Baal Peh? So Hashem says, if I would have written down the majority of the Torah, then I would have appeared to be a stranger to the Jewish people because of the fact that the Goyim stole our Torah and they copied it and they take it on their own and they would have the same Torah we have. That if not for things remaining Baal Peh, then it would have been Ma Beinom L'Umais. What difference would there be between the Yidden? Where's the V'neflinu? Elu might see him Sifreim. Elu means us. We would take a half Svarim. But the Goyim who copied our Torah also have Svarim. We have it on parchment. They also copied it on parchment to make it look like this. Elu might see him diftereim, but then the Elu might see him diftereim. Narvas, then God by default he made the Torah Shebal Peh. Now it's unique. You have the same written, and who knows the Torah? Only the Yidden know the Torah. How beautiful! And Rab Chagai b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman nemru dvarim b'peh emru chsav ein onu yodim ezim hem chaviv. That the chavivos, and we already quoted the Babli Vayti Gittin, Rabbi Yochanan, who argues with Rabbi Loza, uses the pasuk Alpi. That's the Alpi over here in the Yerushalmi. Elam madich ki Alpi hadvarim ha'ela, and that's Torah Shebal Peh. You know what God says? For that korati itcha bris. That's Yisrael. Hada amra an oisem Shebal Peh chavivin. In other words, the bris is dafke on the Torah Shebal Peh. The bris is on the Torah Shebal Peh. And then we're going to start, and like we just to finalize, like we said, that it says in Chassidus that chavivin is on the chefze. It's more chaviv inherently. Why? Torah is chachmas shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chachma v'atzilus. That's Torah shebechsav. What is Torah Shebal Peh? Torah Shebal Peh is God's will that is greater. Torah Shebal Peh. It comes from Kesed. Where do Yud Gimel Midos come from? What's a bris? A covenant is something supra-rational. That's the pshat over here. That the fact that the bris that God made was not on the written Torah, was on Torah Shebal Peh, Zaraya, that Torah Shebal Peh is higher than Torah Shebechsav. To be continued.
Isn't Torah Shebal Peh infinite?
Torah Shebal Peh is infinite, thank you, and Torah Shebechsav is limited. Another expression, because Chachma is already Oidus Bekelim. Kesed, Dafka and Chabad, Chasidus, Kesed is beyond the 10 spheres. So the infinity of the